Good, good morning, grandkids. I almost said it too soon. We are going to be continuing the story with the Phantom in the Woods. And this is chapter 4. I tried to get this made for you Friday, and both times I tried it, it was silent. But my son took care of it. This is chapter 4. Tucker leaves Mr. Dell's farm and continues on into the village, thinking of things to tuck into his old, worn backpack. He first goes to Betty's Bites cafe and hopes that a girl that he likes will be in there. When he got there and opened the door of the cafe, it was like walking into a greenhouse. Miss Betty had plants everywhere, mostly hanging from the ceiling, though. But I must admit, they did look nice hanging in all the windows also. I looked around and I saw Susan sitting at a table in a far corner by a window, books spread out on the table, and a chocolate milkshake near her hand. I stopped at the register and asked Miss Betty for a Coke, then carried it over to Susan's table. "Do you mind if I squeeze in here?" Susan looked up and smiled. "Plunk yourself down there and help me with this problem." And she pulled a book out of the way so that I could set my drink down. I sat down and said, "If it's a math problem, I'll just get up and go on back out the door now." "Never mind then," she said. "I didn't want to work on that anymore anyway." And she stacked the books all up and shoved them aside. "So what are you doing in town today?" "Oh, nothing really. Needed to pick up a couple of things and stop and see you." Tucker grinned. "So did your mom tell you to get some class lessons done today?" "No," Susan said. "I was just passing the time for a bit. In an hour, I'm going to work here for a couple of hours so Betty Townsend can go down the hill to Licksville for a dentist appointment." "Don't you ever have to stay home and do any schoolwork?" Susan asked. "Nah," I laughed. "That's my little brother's job. Man, he hates arithmetic. But I can't blame him. I do too." I smiled at Susan. She's got the prettiest blue eyes. "Well, I'm going. Just had to chat for a bit. Got things to do. Probably have to chop more wood with Dad." I leaned over and put a kiss on top of her head and shuffled on out. I walked over to Calvin's grocery, which he just called Calvin's Goods, and opened his flappy screen door and turned the handle on the door. It didn't open. "Oh no," I groused. "I forgot that Mr. Goodson closed at noon on Fridays. He liked his long weekends." "Oh well, I could get stuff for a chance another day, and I was sure I could find stuff at home to go into that old backpack. I might as well walk on up to the trail and pick out a spot to build me a nest to tuck myself into tonight." I reached the trail behind my house and started walking up to where Dad and I had been chopping wood. I crossed over to the other side of the trail from where we had been working and started looking around for a good spot. I found 2 trees close together with some shrubs and broken sticks and leaves scattered around. This looked like a good spot. I crossed back over the trail and started dragging over the limbs full of leaves that Dad had cut off the small trees that we'd been chopping down to get logs for Mom and for Mr. Dell's fence. I wouldn't need much added to the growth already over there to have an unnoticeable hiding place. started to interweave the leaf-covered small limbs in with the bushy growth at the bottom of the trees. For not ever doing this before, I seemed to be doing a pretty good job of it. It was kind of fun, too. I sat down for a bit, wiping some sweat off my forehead. A squirrel ran down and around the tree, stopping when he saw me, his little whiskers twitching, his tiny paws holding a nut. We sat there looking at each other, him wondering why I was there, me wondering if he was going to throw that nut at me. He gave in first and turned, flicking his tail, and ran back up the tree. I got up and started working on my little hidey hole again. A bee kept nagging at me, and I finally, after swatting it away a few times, decided I was going to have to kill it if it didn't take itself on to somewhere else. I finally decided that I'd done all that I could and started walking back down the trail toward the house. I looked back at my little shelter to see how it looked from a distance. Pretty good, I thought. It just looked like all the other bushes and limbs and growth throughout the woods. I turned back for home, looking forward to dinner this evening. I started brushing leaves off of my coat and out of my hair as I approached the back door into the kitchen. It smelled like we were going to have meatloaf, one of my favorites. I was sniffing the air in anticipation. When I went in, I went to my room, put the old backpack on my bed, went into the hall and into the bathroom, and washed my face and hands. I then tried to get any leaves or twigs out of my hair and ran a comb through my hair quickly. Razor was prancing, his tail wagging, looking like he'd missed me. I gave him a pat, hurried on into the kitchen. Mom had the food on the table, and we all sat down. Dad said a prayer over the food. Then Mom, tucking a strand of blonde hair behind one ear, said, "Eat up and mind the gravy, it's hot." She started helping Champ with his food. Then she turned to me and said, "What have you been up to today, Tucker? I haven't seen you since this morning sometime." Razor was sitting beside my chair, waiting patiently as I handed him down a piece of my meatloaf. Champ saw me and grinned, and I gave him a wink. Mom and Dad knew I did this, but they never said anything. "I've mostly been lurking around town," I said. "I wanted to pick up some pencils for me and Champ, but got there too late and Calvin was already closed." I glanced at Champ and said, "Sorry, Champ, I always forget that he closes early on Friday. I've still got 2 pencils and you can have one." "Nah, don't want to do any arithmetic anyway," Champ said as he glanced sideways at Dad. But he was eating and not paying any attention to us. I talked to Susan. She was in the cafe and was going to work for a couple of hours so Miss Townsend could go down the hill to the dentist. "Ah, your girlfriend," Dad said, with a wiggle of his eyebrows. "No, my friend. I did kiss her goodbye on the top of her head," I grinned. "Oh, yuck," said Champ as he pretended to choke on some mashed potatoes. Mom said, "Speaking of Susan, I thought I'd walk over to the Clancy's and visit with her mom, Carol, for a bit. She wasn't feeling too well at church last Sunday. Wanted to see how she's doing. I'll be back before dark." I nodded with my mouth full. Dad grunted and kept on eating. Champ slipped a bite of something down to Razor. "Well, since no one seems to care, I guess I'll just go on, and someone else can do the dishes and clean everything up." She got up from the table, and we all busted out laughing. as she threw her napkin at Dad, who caught it before it hit his face. She asked if anyone wanted dessert, and we all groaned. I personally was too stuffed. Late that evening, after Mom got back home and had Champ tucked into bed, Dad went on out to the garage, started working on a workbench that he was building. After all was quieted down, I slipped out of my room with my old backpack and my tool belt strapped on. I made my way into the woods until I was out of sight of the garage and then stepped out onto the trail. I had put on a dark shirt and my old camouflage coat. I knew it'd be getting colder, so I had rolled up the quilt off my bed. It needed washing anyway, and I brought it with me. It was late and pretty dark, and I wondered if I should have let Dad know that I was coming up here. He probably would have understood, but he also would have wanted to come with me. It wasn't long before I came to the little camp that I had tucked in off the side of the road. Nothing had been disturbed. I tossed the quilt inside, set my backpack down beside the opening, and I crawled into what little space was open. It seemed like an hour that I had been sitting hunched up in there. I had finally wrapped the quilt around me. I had been watching a spider working on building itself a web across from me on another little bush. More sticks than anything. The moon was glinting on the silvery strings. Then I heard something, and the moon was shining on something else. Something was shimmering in the air on the other side of the trail. I'd moved a little bit, then it looked like it turned a little bit and moved in another direction. It's looking for me. It knows I'm here somewhere. I kept tucked in and watched and observed. How was I going to make contact with it? It could touch me, but could I touch it? I wondered. Should I move to let it know I'm here? I wasn't afraid. Something in the air couldn't hurt you. Besides, the other time it seemed more playful than harmful. I noticed that it seemed to be taking on a little more form. It seemed like, as it moved around, a separation of legs, and sometimes a separation of arms could be seen, and then it couldn't. Was it trying to take a shape? Would it, if it could see me? I decided to come out of my sticks and leaves, and I crawled out of my shelter and stood up, waiting. The ghostly wraith turned suddenly, as if it heard me. Then the barely seen essence crossed the road and hung there in front of me. I had watched the disturbance of the leaves and twigs. Across the road, I should say. A wavery outline of an arm came loose from the form, that shimmering thing, and moved out toward me. I couldn't tell if it was pointing at me or not. I couldn't see any fingers. I reached out to see if I could feel anything, but my hand went right through what I supposed was its hand. I wondered what its reaction would be if I talked to it. Could it hear or understand? I might know some of the answers if I knew what it even was. I started wondering if anyone at home knew I was gone. I thought maybe I should start back home. Not because I wanted to be there. I just didn't want to be here. I finally opened my mouth and said, I don't know what you are, or if you can hear me. I probably need to get home now, though. I heard a low moan coming from its direction, and I took off running, hoping I was headed in the right direction. I left the quilt and the backpack, not caring, and wishing that my dad was here. I heard another low moan back there and stopped to look back just to see through if the blob was there. And it was. I turned and I ran. So that's the end of today's. Next time we will have to see what happens after he gets home. His parents are probably going to be upset because he went by himself, but even that Mr. Dell may have contacted them already and told him that Tucker had come to see him before he went there. So we'll wait and see what happens in the next chapter. So you kids hang on. Come back and be with me next Friday, and we'll see what's going on. Bye-bye, grandkids.